So while you continue to make it, anybody who knows me will be not surprised to know that my method is less organized and less structured than yours. But at the same time, it's kind of it is incredibly forgiving. Like there is really no way to do it wrong. As Carrie said, I've used what she called a swirl and tie technique, which I think is a really good description of it. And I'll go ahead and demonstrate it. And it does make like everything denser. And you can actually, if I turn one of these off, let me unplug this guy. By the way, I have named my blobs are named. This is Ernie, this is Bert, and Baby has yet to be named. I don't think we have a name. So any good ideas are welcome. So if I
and Bert and Ernie are both 200 LED strips, and Baby is 100 LEDs, right?
That's correct. And actually, what I was going to do, I think 100 LED strip. If I'm going to get started, this is a slower technique. Partially because the zip ties, partially because I'm slower in my hands. I'm not a knitter. I've never been able to knit. I have attempted it. So this method takes longer. I will not certainly not finish, but my attempt today is going to start with 100 LED string. And you can make a fun little sphere. You can make a, blob of any shape you want. But also what I found that's kind of fun is if you do a half a sphere with 100 LEDs, it makes a nice hat. So that's actually what I'm going to go for today. And you can see here, I turn the LEDs off on this. If I pull this closer, so you can see that you see all the little zip ties interspersed. Let me see if I get focused with the LEDs, but they're the same color. It doesn't look bad. If you use white 4-inch, like teeny tiny zip ties, I think, as I did say, zip ties, they don't really show, and they kind of blend their way into the blob. So let me get started. A lot of the things Carrie said are really, really applicable to what I'm gonna talk about. Let me unplug. Let's see which guys are. Let's see. Yeah, unplug you. Unplug. Oh, no, not the light, not the overhead light. Okay. I've got different things plugged in different places in just a second. Okay, so I'm going to start with my spool of 100 LEDs. Now, a couple of things. Carrie makes hers with the LEDs off. I have a harder time. I frequently get the LEDs backwards. So I find it really useful, and I'm not as adept with my hands. It's another reason I don't solder on live streams like Carrie does. It's not a pretty process. It's like making sausage. You just don't want to see it. You want to see the end result. So here. So I like to turn it on. Also, just if you just haven't had a chance to play with these LED strings, I want to quickly point out they come with this little really super cheap controller built in, and you can take it off and do fun things, but it has a lot of pretty neat effects. If you just go ahead and, I don't know if you can see there, tilt the camera and just plugged it in to power, to 5-volt power. There's a push button on the front of that controller, and you can I'll create kind of a lot of patterns just, by pushing the button, and they actually work really, really well in a blob form. It's kind of fun. So there's no need to, add anything, do any coding to have a pretty cool effect. Another thing I want to point out is, let me see if I can get a solid color going, is, what Carrie said, but I don't know if it'll show. I don't know if the difference in here, actually the intensity will show, but you can kind of see, it's a little hard to see here, but I'm trying to show an LED right side up next to an LED upside down. And of course the pattern, there we go. It's not going to, the intensity doesn't, it kind of saturates on the camera, but if you actually look at, you can tell visually what the front and the back is actually much more easily visually than by feel.
Yeah, you can definitely tell once they're on for sure, which is the back and front.
So even if I don't leave it on, I definitely turn it on frequently when I'm making it just to make sure everything's right side up. So let me explain my technique, which again is much less structured than Carrie's. So like her, I start, usually, it doesn't actually matter, but I usually start with the end closest to the wires. I'm going to turn this off for a second, and I keep turning it. All right, I put my blob on the same power source as my overhead light. That's not good. So so I have a bunch of these 4-inch super tiny zip ties. There's a link to the ones I use in my blog. I think if you probably in the notes for this YouTube video, there'll be a link to the blog post.
Yes, I will. We will add some links and stuff tomorrow too.
Okay, excellent.
Ooh, can I interrupt for a couple to answer a couple questions? Okay, so let's see. So dropping stitches, any hints? Yes. So it is kind of funny that you can drop stitches kind of just as easily with wire as you can with yarn. And maybe even easier because you don't have any needles through these stitches, like keeping them, right? So I think actually now that I'm doing it, that it was a little easier to do the 8 8 around because you just have like a little more circumference to work with. So I would recommend that as your first blob to make it 8 stitches around because I feel like it will help a little bit. So once after I got past like the first row, I started to bend it upwards into a tube shape because it naturally wanted to be that way, right? If we kept it flat, it would sort of keep increasing, right? And we don't want that to happen. We want the same circumference, right? Same diameter. And so folding it up into that pattern will help. Also, pre-bending is helpful. Like doing this pre-bend in the loop first and then putting the loop through, I found helped me not drop stitches. The other thing that you can do is you can kind of bend your stitches inward a little bit like this so that they kind of like make a 90-degree almost to the stitch below them. And then you can like unbend it the next round as you're knitting it, but that also helps keep your stitches in place a little bit better. So yes, I hope that was helpful. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
No,
go ahead,
that's fine. Again, like your method is more structured, and that's good. There's a right way and a wrong way to do it. I think
there is no right or wrong way to do blobs.
This is the chaos. I should name mine the chaotic blob method. I think this feels like a little bit like one of those NPR like cooking shows or something they do on the radio somehow. I don't know, commentary.
I have like an extra little solder blob or something near this LED, or I don't know, maybe it's an epoxy blob. I'm just gonna like nip it off with some nippers real quick, very carefully so that I don't break the wire, right? But it's just like a little bit that's sticking up that's kind of sharp and bumming me out. So
all right, all right.
I
think sometimes, yeah, I mean, sometimes you find solder splices. It's clear one of the wires broke and they just soldered it and shipped it. So maybe, I don't know if it's related.
Yep.
All right, so let me get started on my technique here. I guess I'm a little further away from the camera, but I'll try to hold it up. So the way these blobs are formed is that and the reason it's smaller is instead of actually knitting with the string as it is, I curl the string, and let me get this close to the camera, into little swirly S shapes. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to curl about 10 LEDs at a time and then start to wind them in a circle. You don't, one warning, based on my experience, is leave some, you may have this LED string on a spool, or sometimes it comes without a spool, but with a zip tie to hold it together. Only unwind about 10 LEDs at a time and work with those. More than that, and it becomes a really, really big untangling problem. And even though their wires and kind of stiff, you'd be amazed at how well tangled these things can get. So it's a little bit like a slinky. Honestly, it's like a slinky. If you've ever tried to untangle a slinky, it's pretty horrible. So you want to you'll end up doing about, say, 10. I usually do about 10 at a time. One, it doesn't need to be exact. And take them, and the pattern you make is you kind of hold your fingers at either end of the LED. I don't know if I've got focus here. I'm going to maybe move baby blob out of the way because it might be catching the focus. And you basically hold your fingers at either end of the LED and twist until you've got kind of a, I don't know what the shape is, but you've
kind of an S spot.
Kind of an S shape.
Yeah,
and
galaxy.
Yeah, and again, so the wire goes, the trick is to go down swirling each blob into its own S shape. And the part I always mess up is for it to look really good, you want to keep swirling it, all the swirls to be oriented in the same direction. So let me, and by the way, but if you mess it up, you just unwind it and do it again. So it's kind of easiest to kind of think of it as kind of twisting right or twisting left. So I've done 2 already. So I go to the third LED in the string, I grab it on either sides, and I'm twisting it clockwise. That's the best way to think about it, is you grab it, you twist the 2 ends of the LED clockwise, and just keep kind of wrapping the string around the outside into that S shape until it sits kind of nicely near its neighbors. And what you get is kind of a denser group of LEDs in this little swirly shape. Hopefully that people can see that. Let me know if in the chat if that's hard to see. I can try to put it in a darker background.
I can see it.
You can make it out. Okay. So, and then you just keep going. So like take about 10 LEDs, grab each one, try to make sure it's oriented upward. And if again, like me, you'll always forget, you plug it in and look at it, and yeah, the right sides are all up, and okay, we're good. But also a little pro tip I'll tell you about. So I'm going to swirl a couple more. So again, swirl it clockwise, and these are going to be bending all over. So don't worry about it looking perfect or all that. We're going to manipulate the heck out of these, and it won't matter in the end. That's the beauty. That's maybe one of the reasons I gravitated towards LED projects, is once they're lit up and illuminated, nobody's looking at the quality of your stitches or, you know, even if you dropped a stitch or if like me, some of them are upside down, it just looks cool. Okay, so you keep moving down the chain. Make sure your LED is pointed upwards. And I'm going clockwise. So twirl the blob twirl the LED clockwise, wrap the, about one turn, wrap the wire around it. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'll do 4 more and get a chain of about 10 LEDs. And by the way, the reason I actually even came up with this project in the first place is I was actually, because it's through my idea of wearables, because I love these LED strings. They're super flexible and easy to use. And I wanted to use one. I thought it'd be fun. The LEDs are spaced so far apart. I was trying to find a way to make them look closer together. Again, grab, twist clockwise, and turn. Look closer together so I could sew it on as a decorative trim on an outfit. And then once I started down that path, by the way, I never did complete that idea, though. That may still happen at some point. Once I started down that path, the wire holds its shape so nicely. I started to wonder if it could actually hold a 3D structure once I'd already bent it.
Yeah.
And that's where the zip ties come in. All right. So I've taken about 10 LEDs or so. Don't tell me if I've done more or less. It's okay. All right, into a chain. So here they are. And so we're going to, you know, Karen has, the nice thing about Carrie's method is you can count, you're doing 8 in a round. This is a bit more touch and go. You kind of have to estimate how many come in each level, because what we're basically doing is we're going to form these. We're going to start bending these around. You can start with a loose end into a, here, I'll just try to keep that out of the way. I'm starting with the LED closest to the controller. That's going to be the center LED in what basically becomes a spiral pattern. You're basically spiraling all the LEDs around, and then you're just going to zip tie them together. So kind of you start with the first 4, and this is where it becomes a kind of, there's no right way to do it. You really just want to add enough zip ties to hold it into kind of a structure, into kind of a mesh structure. And what I usually do with the first few, it's actually less critical, is you kind of zip tie each one to its kind of 3 or 4 nearest neighbors. So just to hold the shape. And what ends up happening, but unlike a knitting pattern, is if you find that it's not holding a structure well, you can actually go back and reinforce it with zip ties later. So here's what I've done. The parts where the wires of one swirl are near the wires of the other, I put a little zip tie through and just pull it tight, and do it for the next one in the chain. Again, you kind of, anywhere where you think if you wanted to hold it together, the 2 wires should stay close together. You put the zip tie through and pull it tight, and you know, keep going until you've started kind of a circular shape. And again, if it doesn't look right, you can bend, like if you don't like this piece out, don't worry about the nice thing is you can actually kind of bend it even once it's formed. You can say like, oh, there's a big gap there, and just twist it around. So, and you just literally keep going. And again, the mistake I've made is each LED is in a clockwise twirl, and I'm winding the LEDs clockwise. Sometimes I lose track, and then I've started, while I'm winding the LEDs around the circle in a clockwise direction of going this way. Sometimes I lose track, and then I start going the other way. And it all looks fine in the end, but if you have a pattern, an LED pattern that depends on lights lighting up in sequence, you can see the LEDs zipping around like clockwise and then counterclockwise when you hit that thing. And again, it's not really a big deal because you've got a light up blob, but
right
at the end of the day, and that's what matters. But
yes.
You know, if you're like to, if you feel the need to make it like consistent all the way around, then that's you know, something you want to take care of. Oh, okay. So just get this, you know, the controller out of the way. And the one thing you do want to do is obviously the bright side of the LED should be on the outside. And right now, the bright side of my LEDs are facing up, and it's going to curve downwards away from the camera. And I want to get my controller and the wire on the outside of my blob. I don't want to knit the blob around it because it'll be harder to feed that through.
Yeah, that's something I probably should have noted too, is to keep the controller and the wires, on the outside instead of the inside. I mean, you can fish it through probably. Well, on this one you can fish it through probably, but on yours you're a little bit tighter.
Right, on mine I couldn't. So yeah, I should have done. you know, by the way, also with this one, you can also start with the far end. It doesn't really matter, but since this came on a spool, I didn't want to unwind the whole thing to get to the far end. So this will work just fine. And so right now what I'm doing is I'm zip tying, actually, like I'm zip tying it so that the controller wire is zip tied tightly to like the center swirl. And I'm just still going around, and this is just a slow kind of messy looking process. So what I do is I zip tie a bunch of things together. That's a wrong size zip tie. And then I stop and I reassess. In the beginning, it's not going to look like much, but after you get to a point, you stop and you reassess and say, okay, where are there gaps? What's not holding it together as well as it should? Or you'll just keep, and you'll just add more zip ties. The solution to everything is more zip ties. That's the nice thing. If only. Like,
right, I love
simple. It. So something not look right, something in the wrong place, more zip ties. So, and really that's it. You just keep going. And again, the other trick is, a couple tricks, is at some point when you reach, when you have about all 10 in a circle, you're going to have to start curving it. So if you want to give it a specific curvature, I should have brought a bowl in here. You could take like a cereal bowl and something and start to, if you think you kind of know the curvature you want it to have at the end, you can kind of place it over that and use that as a guide for how much curvature to give it when you pull it down. It also matters, how much curvature your end blob has. Again, I hope that you guys can kind of see this as we go. Yes, and Bob has a question about, I consider different colored zip ties. And the answer is yes. I think I tried it with black, but they just the white ones disappear when they're lit up, when they're illuminated. And I just like that appearance better. I didn't like, but you certainly can. Okay, so one more thing I want to show about this technique, and then it's really just a lot of zip tying and going, zip tying and going, is, so after a while, you're going to just have to start imposing the curvature on it. And if you want to do a sphere or spheroid, you need to keep track of about when you're halfway through, because it's going to kind of naturally tend to get wider and wider and wider, as you go down.
Right.
But you're going to need to give yourself time to work your way back to the center. So again, if you kind of keep track of when you're at about 50, you'll start to automatically kind of, each one of these, each circle is going to have more and more swirls. Each kind of layer in the spiral will have an increasing number of swirls until you want to start bringing it in, and then you'll very consciously have to kind of use fewer and fewer and pull it tighter and tighter. I'm not at the point where it's going to start to do that yet, and I'm not even really at the point where you see a lot of curvature. I'm still going around my spiral clockwise. And I think right now, while I was talking, I just created one more swirl and just added it, which you can do, but I like to create a bunch and then add them. Like I like to swirl like 10 of them and then put them on. Now the zip ties will start to get in your way. So the other thing, the last, actually I guess significant pointer as you go, is I usually like, do a circle and then start to clip them. You have to be really careful, because if you snip the wires, you're going to be unhappy, because then scissors work, but they're an easy way to accidentally clip the wires. I like to use flush cutters, because I'll hold the end of the zip tie and just, kind of run the flush cutters down the end till it hits the, I don't know what you call that, the clasp or whatever, and then just snip, and I'll visually make sure I'm not going to cut any wires. What works even better, if you're in terms of absolutely eliminating the possibility of snipping any wires, are nail scissors. Those clip zip ties really well, and it's actually even harder to clip the wires with it. But I kind of like my flush cutters. I'm pretty facile with them, so I have had to resolder a wire or two. One thing about these wires is if you do have to solder them, they're coated in kind of an enamel. Yeah. So you have to like melt the enamel off the ends before you can solder them. So so this gets messy too. Like Carrie's is nice and neat. I'm going to have cut zip ties. Basically,
I don't know if mine's like.
But the thing about mine, again, is I rely on the fact that at the end of the day, it's gonna look cool, because it's a blob that lights up. So yeah, it's
totally.
So I think I've covered the basic technique. I'll keep going. I'll try to show you when I get to some curvature, and show you how again, it's more of a kind of a gut feeling as to how much curvature you're going to need. And by the way, but the nice thing about this kind of mesh you end up with, again, is that it's stretchy. So if you need more space in some place, you can just kind of pull it apart a little more, push it together, a little bit like almost like chainmail out of LED string. Okay, so anyway, so now, so you can see, so I've done the first 10 and I missed 2 zip ties. Let's clip those. But then I'm just going to repeat the process of swirling another 10 LEDs and fastening them to the exterior of the blob. And that's really it. So, and again, sometimes it's fun to plug it in and see, see what it looks like halfway through, but I will make a little more progress before I do that again. So yeah, so Carrie, please ask any questions you have in the chat if something I've said isn't clear. But again, this technique allows for a lot of improvisation. I'm sure there's a million variations on it that you could come up with.